I'm 20 years old and a female. I have issues working standard jobs, so I work as a delivery girl for Uber Eats. Usually deliveries go quite well, but occasionally my GPS app will have issues finding the right address and I'll get a little lost. I was on my last delivery of the night before going home. I picked up the food from the restaurant at about 6:45 PM, just as the sun was setting. I put the drop-off address into my GPS and drove to where I thought it was. My GPS led me past 2 apartment complexes and into a residential neighbourhood. I passed one house, and as soon as I drove past it, the porch lights came on. That's not too out of the ordinary. Some people have automatic lights. What was odd was there was a bright SUV with some pink writing on its back window, parked just off the side of the house. Essentially, this house ended. There was a tree and some bushes right by the door, and this car was parked just by these bushes. Anyway, my GPS tells me to keep driving in a very small private road just past this house. This address is, of course, wrong, but I decide to get out and take a look for the address. Maybe it was one of the houses, or I could see an address on the apartment buildings. I walked back to the house that had the SUV parked next to it, as this was the nearest house to the one my GPS told me to go to. As soon as I came into view of the house, the porch lights came on again, which is odd, because I didn't even cross in front of the property this time. The porch lights coming on let me read the address and realised this wasn't the place either. I considered going down the alley by the SUV, but something in my gut tells me it's a bad idea. I get back in my car and drive around for 5 more minutes. My GPS tries to send me to the same place again, so I decided to stay in my car, but drive by all the houses and try to read the addresses. I drive down the whole road. No match. Then, I did something dumb. I decided I would try to read what was on the back of the SUV, so I drive past the house, porch lights come on, and stay on. I try to read it and I can't make anything out. Then, I see a face pop out of the bushes next to the SUV. Well, as much as a face as possible. This person is wearing a ski mask. He gets out of the bushes and is wearing all black clothing. He taps on the window of the SUV, and another person in a ski mask and black gloves comes out of the passenger side of the SUV. They both start fast walking towards my car. I notice something shiny and reflective in the hands of the one that was in the bushes. I can't say for sure if it was a knife, but I wasn't going to stick around long enough to find out. I throw my car into reverse and speed out of there. I looked back one more time as I drove away. Both men in masks had stopped walking towards me, but just stared at my car as I drove off. I called the cops shortly after. They called me back and said they investigated, but the SUV was empty, and nobody was at the house. They made sure I was safe and called it there. I don't deliver after dark anymore.
So the backstory is that my neighbor has an illegal extension at the back. The front and back are rented separately, which is illegal. Honestly, we don't give a flying fuck about the extension until there were some dodgy people living in the back. We live in a really nice and crimeless neighborhood, but as soon as they moved in, we noticed cars being broken into, houses being burgled, and more. We didn't get burgled though. Then one day, we came home to find our shed on fire. Once it was put out, the damage was severe and my dad's tools were all ruined. Cost was over 12 grand. The shed was brick built, but the inside had flammable stuff in it like fuel for equipment, white spirits, etc. We checked our CCTV and saw it was one of the neighbors from the back who flicked what looked like a cigarette through an open shed window. It was a very small window, but it was right next to the separation fence. It was open because my dad was ventilating it. Sure enough, police told us that the fire brigade stated it was the cigarette that caused the incident, and they were surprised that it wasn't a larger explosion. Anyway, the police arrested and charged one of the neighbors at the back, but after searching their bungalow, the illegal building in the back, they realized that they were growing weed there, and that the build was illegal to rent separately from the front, so it all got shut down and the landlord was fined. It wasn't exactly our fault, as the police arrived anyway due to the shed explosion. Anyways, the next week, the landlord comes over saying that we had lost him $400 a month. My dad tells them that it isn't our fault and to leave. He also said that it was an illegal build, so it was the landlord's fault. Anyway, the next morning, we wake up to some oil or tar or petrol splattered all over our wooden front door and stove. Police were called, and CCTV showed it was the landlord. He pled guilty, was given 6 months community service, and was fined for the damages. A year later, I was home alone. I was 15 and was revising for my GCSEs. It was the Easter holiday, but my parents were working and my sister was out. I was blasting music when I hear a knock at the door. I turn down the music and get ready to apologize to whoever was at the door. I open it, and it's the landlord. I shit myself, slam the door, call my dad, and sit upstairs. My dad called the police, but when they arrived, he wasn't there, but he had splashed that shit all over the drive again. Anyway, the story is that he got arrested again and put in prison for longer. But basically, I shat myself because I opened the door fully. How did he not put his foot in there or something? I was stupid for not looking for who it was.
So, I wasn't really sure if this post belonged in this sub, but here we go anyway. I lived in a really nice town in South Florida, where every community was gated. Everyone felt really safe there, and we had one of the lowest crime rates in the state. When I was in 6th grade, I would wait by the bus stop every morning. The community I lived in was huge, so there were always a lot of other kids waiting in the spot with me. I had finally convinced my mum to let me go alone, instead of being escorted by my elder cousins. I still have never told this story. Anyway, it was a normal morning, but the bus was running a little late. For this reason, a lot of kids were already at the bus stop waiting. All of a sudden, a jeep stops right in front of me, and a man, probably in his late 30s, leans out the window. "You want to ride to school?" he asks me. I was really surprised, so didn't respond. "Come on, I'll take you there faster than the bus can." Mind you, he was only asking me, although there were about another 20 kids around me. I was also really developed for my age. I assured him that my bus would be here soon, and by some miracle, as soon as I said that, the bus came around the corner. He looked back and sped off faster than I have ever seen anyone do. I'm 20 now, but I still wonder what would have happened if I was naive enough to go with him. So, weird guy in the jeep. Let's not meet again.
Tensions were high around our apartment complex when I was around age 10. In a month's time, we had a man that committed suicide in a unit, a partial fire in a building leading to reconstruction, and a child that had been hit by a car, who later survived. Even at a younger age, I remember distinctly having a strong grasp on the bizarre events that were taking place. It had to be around spring in 1997. My mother was single and raising my little sister, who was 5 years old, and I. She managed a different complex and would pick us up from school and drop us off at her apartment while she returned to work for a couple of hours. I have 3 older siblings, whom all moved out, that at some point had to keep an eye on each other at a young age, so this wasn't really a new premise. There was no money for a sitter. The oldest just had to assume the role, which was me. For the most part, we were really quiet kids in our 2nd and 3rd story unit. We played with our toys, watched a little television, and sometimes played Sega or Nintendo. On this particular afternoon, I recall playing with a Dash Rendar figurine from Star Wars, while my sister was doing whatever in the same living room. Suddenly, the doorknob started violently shaking. My heart dropped, and I remember it being the first time I had felt such terror. I rushed to the phone and paged my mom 911, and then dialed 911 to let the operator know that someone was breaking in. The operator reassured me that help was on the way. The door handle was still being messed with, but I was nervous if the deadbolt and chain would be enough. A couple of loud bangs happened, as if someone was ramming the door with their shoulder. And then it all stopped. The cops arrived shortly before my mom, only to find a note from the maintenance man saying something like, "Air filter check." Now, the maintenance man claimed that he announced himself verbally, but I knew it was bullshit. Of course, the cops did nothing, and my mom's complaint to the office didn't yield in this man being fired. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the most unnerving part of the story. My mom said the guy would stare her down in the parking lot and just smile at her. The whole situation creeped us out, and we wanted to move, but we couldn't afford the expenses. One night a couple of weeks later, I was awakened by a loud thud coming from the roof. Being so easily rattled from the previous event, I ran to my mom's room to wake her up. She checked around to make sure everything was in place and reassured me that it was probably a rodent. We went to school the next morning and were dropped off at home in the afternoon as usual. Mom usually did a quick sweep of the place, even before the attempted break-in, but this time, something just seemed off. It was just a very uneasy feeling the apartment had when walking in. My sister and I were ordered to stay downstairs by the front door while she investigated upstairs. We waited patiently and felt very unnerved when suddenly our mother's shrieking confirmed our suspicion. She came barreling down the stairs and ushered us out the door. We went to a neighbor's and phoned the police. My mother was barking at them. "Someone is in our apartment." The police responded pretty quickly, and I was finally able to understand the situation. The bedroom had a walk-in closet that contained the hatch to the attic that connected to the entire building's AC heating system. There were shelves that were pretty high up lining the closet walls. My mother walked in to find a dirty pair of men's tighty-whitey underwear lying in the floor. This was enough to send her running and phoning the police. However, the investigation revealed something more. The attic hatch had been disturbed. Just to add, the police found full handprints on the shelves in the closet. The noises I heard the previous night were more than likely this man hoisting himself back into the crawl space, using the shelves to climb up on after visiting us. The man was taken into custody, but I don't recall what the sentencing was. I need to look into it. Coincidentally, my older brother is now a homicide detective for that area. We ended up moving into my grandmother's house shortly after.
In October of 2016, a longtime family friend began harassing my family. So I've known this guy since I was around 5. He worked at my dad's friend's car dealership as the only person who basically maintenances the exteriors, like washes the cars and shines them, etc. My parents became fond of him because he looked very sweet, and they rather felt pity for him as he had a horrible hygiene habit. They'd often buy him food, gift him clothes, and things of that sort. Around 2015, this man gets a job right across the street from my mum's job. He saw my mum one morning, and they just waved at each other. This man starts calling my mum frequently. Now, my mum is extremely nice. Too nice. So instead of just not picking up, she would talk to him. This guy becomes obsessed with my mum, to the point she tells him to stop contacting her, and this was around May of 2016. All is well, and the guy stops contacting her. Months later, he began to watch my mum. He would park his car in front of my mum's job and watch her. She noticed him, but she never saw her as a huge threat, so she never said anything. That's where things escalated. My mum was walking out of work with a co-worker one day. Normal co-worker friendship. My mum catches a ride with her co-worker to a mandatory work event, and this was so she didn't have to drive home too late, as these events end late at night. Meanwhile, the guy is watching them walk to his car. He suddenly thinks that my mum is having an affair with this guy and decides to follow them. They arrive at the place and my mum stays in the car while her co-worker goes inside to check if it's the right location. The stalker walks up to the car, opens the door, slaps my mum, grabs a knife from his car, and slashes the co-worker's tyres. My mum is in complete shock and immediately calls her co-worker to come outside. The co-worker decided not to press any charges against him, even though he easily could have, as there were cameras outside the location. Now, my mum mentions none of this to my dad, because my dad is really explosive, to the point that he'd get in trouble over this guy. So everything is okay for a couple of days, until this guy starts calling my mum non-stop and leaving her threatening voicemails. The voicemail said things along the lines of, "If you don't meet me up at the hotel on Wednesday at 1 PM, I'm going to tell your husband you're cheating on him." This scares my mum, because my dad had a past with domestic violence, so she's scared my dad would believe him and beat her. Wednesday comes along, and when she gets to work, he's outside watching her. Whole day, just watching her. She calls my grandparents, who are not old farts, as my grandpa is ex-military, ex-judoka, and is no one to play with. They immediately drive to my mum's job, but this guy starts harassing my grandparents and won't leave my mum's job. 1 PM comes around and my mum calls the police. Dude hauls across the street and hides, leaving his car at my mum's job. The police search for him everywhere and he's nowhere to be found. The phone calls continue and things escalate. This man decides to vandalise my mum's car. He throws tar all over the car while it's parked outside my house. The car is destroyed, and my parents have to pay lots of money to be able to fix it. At this point, my dad knows the whole ordeal and is set on killing the guy. We advise him to calm down, because my mum is planning on getting a restraining order from him, and she didn't want my dad to ruin her chances, or commit a crime. He continues calling and stands outside my mum's job every day. This man starts driving by my house every day, and begins to see me as a target. He leaves my mum threatening voicemails, saying he's going to vandalise my car. So at this point, I'm even more terrified. At this point in the story, my mum has had to call the cops on him several times, but the cops say they can't do anything as he hasn't physically attacked her. My mum decides she's going to finally petition for a restraining order, with the police reports and voicemails as proof. They set up a court date and give my mum a temporary restraining order until the court date, so approximately 2 weeks. This doesn't stop the guy from calling, so my mum calls the detective in charge of her case, and the guy hasn't even been served with a restraining order yet, which is a few days before the court date. He was notified with the court date though, so he tells my mum he has proof that she won't stop calling him. He then starts targeting the rest of us. I wake up one Saturday morning and my car has letters drawn all over the windows with nail polish. Luckily, we were able to just scrape it off gently, but by now, I'm a nervous wreck. I start doing bad in my classes, and I hadn't slept for about a month. He then begins to harass my dad with voicemails and phone calls, but luckily, my dad didn't buy any of his bullshit. Finally, the court date arrives. This man shows up with his stepson, and his stepson starts talking shit to my mum, because, of course, he only knows this man's side of the story. The judge calls him in and does the usual questioning, talks about the police reports, etc. The judge asks him if he has anything to say or show. He says, "Yes, I have a phone bill that shows she called me more than 200 times in the past month." The judge says, "Okay, show me." Guess what? He didn't bring it. There's no such thing. The judge nods her head and says, "Okay, I've reached the verdict." He was found guilty, and my mum was awarded a restraining order for life. We finally have peace in our family again. So, family stalker, fuck you, and let's not meet again. Well, anyway guys, that's it for this video. If you enjoyed then please like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. Huge shout out to Goodnight Goosebumps for being in this video, I really appreciate it. So make sure you go over to his channel and give him some love. It'll be linked in the description below for you guys. Also, if you have any stories of your own which you would like to have shared, please make sure to contact me, link also in the description, and you may be featured in a future video. Well, anyway, I hope to see you soon, and I'll speak to you later.